the air.
Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being produced at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future by our wonderful producer, Richard Wicca. Thanks, Richard. And I'm your host, Vicki Ross. I'm the executive director at the Western New York Peace Center, and I'm very proud to announce our co-host for this today is Talia Rodriguez. Hi, Talia.
Hi, Vicki.
So Talia is our Gender Justice Task Force Chair. She is coordinating students at the Buff State Civic and Community Engagement, as well as being the working with food justice, working with the West Side Promise neighborhood and their summer school lunch program, and so many things that you do. So welcome, Talia. And actually, I'll hold up especially the Gender Justice Task Force, not so much for right now, but we do have a Gender Justice Task Force meeting coming right up. So people are always welcome to get involved with that. That's going to be this Saturday at 11:15 in Broderick Park, right?
Yeah, and Vicki, I was just going to say, I know you always provide a very powerful introduction. All people are invited to our meeting, all people of the planet, Vicki and I like to say, and we would love to see you come out to Broderick Park. We will be socially distanced, and we will be working on our issues in the intersection. So we're really excited to invite everyone out.
In the intersection, yes. Jim, shout out to Jim Anderson, who's a friend of the show, Jim Anderson, who says that we are in the intersection. So here in the intersection with us, I'm very, very excited to say, is Peter DeJesus. Peter is just made the newspapers when he was made the new president of the Western Area Labor Federation. Am I saying it right? Or did I?
That's right.
Yeah,
no, you're right.
Very illustrious, very strong, vibrant organization that we're very proud to work with at times, as well as being the political coordinator for the SEIU, 1199 SEIU. Plenty of things we can talk about there too.
Absolutely.
And also, we're especially talking about Latin America and Puerto Rico, I would say, if we have two PuertoRiquena people. Can I say that? Am I saying it right? Puerto Riqueniaks.
That's it. We got two Boricuas on the line. We're good.
So, yeah, we're good. And then, of course, we have our very own Terry Bisson, Dr. Terrence Bisson, who is the coordinator of the Latin American Solidarity Committee, the stalwart, I would say, and the longest lasting task force of the Western New York Peace Center. Welcome, Terry.
Yeah, we're only long-lasting because the problems are always long-lasting, or the connections that we establish are long-lasting.
Yes, both of those things. So we thought that we would talk today. There's plenty of things for us to talk about, but one of the things we really wanted to talk about was organizing in the, even when I say Latin American community, or Latinx community, I feel like don't say that, because I already know that one of the things you'd say is that there's so many different communities, right? So why don't you just start with what is that when you hear that phrase of organizing in Latin American communities? What do you think? Peter, we'll go to you first.
Sure. So for me, when I hear that, it means to me opportunity, right? An opportunity to provide a lifestyle, to provide, an opportunity to uplift one's family, an opportunity to leave this world better for those that you have, your loved ones. So it's all about opportunity when I hear about organizing in the Black or Brown communities. That's just what it is for me.
Right. Sure. And what do you think, Talia?
When I think organizing, again, I always think first on the neighborhood level. So I think folks getting together for a common good. I also think students, because I did a lot of student organizing as an undergrad and as a graduate student. So I think both of those bodies.
Mm-hmm. And Terry, what do you think of?
Yeah, well, I'm very honored to be here on this panel discussion, partly to listen and to meet both of you. I know Vicki pretty well, because traditionally our Latin America solidarity has been, historically we evolved out of organizing about trying to understand what the American policies, what the United States policies did in connection to other countries, and at the request of the peoples of Latin America to make sure that the U.S. citizens knew what their country was doing in their name. So it was a kind of organizing that was educational organizing to all the people of the community, so that they could better influence, for the good, for the common good. But it's just exactly like what you said, Talia. It's working for the common good, but through, education in our case. Educating us because we can learn so much from people from the various other communities. We're trying to promote intersectionalism in the sense that, like last night we co-hosted a presentation by the ambassador to the United Nations from Nicaragua. And it was really wonderful to hear him talk about what the issues that when they look for 10 years ahead, they say, what should our country be doing? It should be trying to eradicate poverty. It should be trying to empower women. It should be continuing to guarantee food in the schools for all school students and make education universal and things like that, which we don't always talk about enough in the United States. So we learn a lot by occupying the same space in solidarity with people who can talk about what needs to be done in the world, So it's a kind of organizing, but I really respect the community door-to-door, worker-to-worker organizing and student-to-student organizing that you guys do.
Yeah. If I can just add a point to that, when we talk about educating when it comes to organizing, I think it's crucially important that we identify that the education has to not only happen within the Latinx community, but outside the community as well, right? A lot of times those who are currently inside the Latinx community don't understand the historical content of where we came from or what, how we've gotten to where we are right now, right? So it's important that we're educating within, the Latinx community, but also outside of the Latinx community as well.
Yeah.
So critical. And, when I'm thinking of, I don't know, one of the things I think of is, especially with organizing, is I think of actually our program Peace Jam that we are connected with. So it's a foundation with Nobel laureates on it. But one of their slogans just means so much to me, of this inspiration, education, and action. And I think organizing has to have all those things. It's also very social worky when thinking, feeling, doing. There's a thinking, feeling, doing game. We need all those elements if we're really going to engage people in a full way. And I think it's so interesting what you said about the educating people within the community. I thought you were going to say also that two-way street on the information too, right? So that, right? What is the community experience? What are they thinking? And I want to say another thing I think of is when we start off even very intentionally saying, first of all, at least Latinx for one thing. So partly all the Latino or anything, but also I know it made a great impression on me. I think you might have been there, Terry, too, when I think, who was it who said, anyway, so I won't even name a name. It'll come to me later. But somebody said, don't say Hispanic. Don't call it Hispanic. We do not want that. And I was like, oh yeah, now I get it. Because when you're looking at the relationships and looking at the history, there's a lot of history there to know. Right? So what would you say to that? Here, Talia, you have
Yeah, go right ahead. Talia's itching to say something about that one.
Something about that.
The diversity of Latin America.
Sure.
will forever bring us strength. Yeah. But within those strengths, there's so many stories and there's so much that we can learn from each other, and so many different cultures and people within those cultures and countries. You know, it's we could have a whole hour just on that.
Right, sure.
Absolutely. And for me, you know, when I hear the term, you know, Hispanic, or I see the term Hispanic on a document, it just, to me, it's a term that's used to marginalize a vast group of a variety of different Latino cultures, right? It's just a term that shouldn't be used.
Well,
So go ahead.
I was just going to say colonialism. It's just, the thing is, because that's what I understood. It's like, oh, that's what that is. So whether it was the colonial powers of whoever, it didn't matter. Was it Spain? Was it Portugal? Was it you know, England and France? You know, all that colonialism that was about conquering, controlling, sucking out the resources. You know, all the other, you know, bad behaviors that were permitted, you know, under, and now I always want to go to the doctrine of discovery, that was, you know, the papal bull. Yes, the papal bull, that so aptly named. You know, so that was just so wrong, and then they went ahead and did it. But some of those things have been addressed. And let me ask this: do you think that's been better addressed in some of the in South America or South or Central America, or in the islands, more so than in the United States, or not? Or does it depend?
You know, I'm not sure. I don't believe it's better in either. Mm-hmm. Right? I think it still maintains the same status that it had. It's something that needs to be worked on both spaces. You might be marginally better on the island than it is in the mainland, but you know, either way, it's still not where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about Puerto Rico, because I really do want to talk about. In fact, I thought of making this only about Puerto Rico, but if we want,
I discouraged Vicki. I discouraged Vicki from making it only about Puerto Rico.
But we need to really delve in now. First of all, I'm going to say I have not yet been to Puerto Rico, so I need to.
Peter, she has an open invitation. She knows she can stay in her.
Oh, you got to go, Vicki. You got to go.
Open invitation, Vicki.
Maybe this fall. Yeah.
Fantastic.
We might have some free time for a little traveling in the fall.
Yeah, Vicki, you and my dad can reflect on your past joint enterprises. So what do we need to know about Puerto Rico besides the fact that it has been sat upon and spat upon and thrown paper towels to by our former administration,
yeah,
as well as where things are right now?
What do we need to know about Puerto Rico and the relationship between the United States? That's a loaded question. There's a lot to learn about the historical content of the relationship between the island of Puerto Rico and the United States. You know, a couple of fun facts. You know, that Puerto Rico is still the only Commonwealth that the United States has ever bombed. You know, there was a point in history to where the United States sterilized over a quarter of the women in the island of Puerto Rico because they deemed them too stupid to procreate. You know, you talk about the riches and natural resources of the island that have been stripped. It was once a multi-crop, you know, territory, and now it's down to single crops that can barely survive. So the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico is complicated. There is a great book that actually details the historical kind of timeline of the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. It's called The War Against All Puerto Ricans. I would encourage anybody who's interested in getting to the kind of historical value of what this relationship is, why the island is suffering in its current form. You know, Puerto Rico was one of the islands that they wouldn't allow us to fly our own flag. Right, it was an island to where the first mayor of Puerto Rico was actually put in place by, you know, people back in the mainland, back in the United States, that were determining how we were going to go about ruling our own island. So
one of the saddest things that I learned, because I was always a Theodore Roosevelt fan, and that just lies to some of the irony of Buffalo, right? Was that I think it took the United States like 6 years to actually get to Puerto Rico from when the time we took, and I say we, right? We took control of Puerto Rico. And I think it was TR that visited. So I was like 6 years, and someone was like, it took a long time to get there. I don't think it would take 6 years, but it took a long time. And in between that time, like we just had military rule, right? In a place where a US president had never even physically been. So that was pretty unique to me as a historian and a political scientist. And also, ironically, as a Theodore Roosevelt fan who knows that he was inaugurated on Delaware Avenue and has been to the TR site. So, you know, fun Puerto Rican fact for you. I mean, we've kind of lived in different ebbs and flows, different iterations of American control, but it's never really been, there's never really been a consensus amongst the people about what way we want that relationship to exist and kind of if it even benefits us.
That was going to be my
Let's whisper that.
like what that would be the next question, right? Is like, what do you hope would happen? What would be your ideal thing to happen? Things.
Talia, ladies first.
No, Peter, we have been friends way too long for you to do that.
Okay.
You go ahead.
So I will say personally for me, what I want to happen is for those family members of mine who still remain on the island to have a say on what's going to become of the island, a say that is not by any way, shape, or form influenced by anybody within the United States, the political realm. I want them to make a decision of themselves, for themselves, free of whatever persecution, that or political games that might be played upon them. So I want them to decide for them what's best and how to go about rebuilding the beautiful island that has seen so much taken from it, but not enough given back to it.
Right. It just is so makes me think of, it's a very different situation in a lot of ways, and yet, you're nodding like you know what I'm going to say, because I think of Cuba. It's very, very different, although that the depth of the similarities of just the unreasonability, the oppression is just so huge.
Right.
Terry, what were you going to say?
Yeah, well, and to clarify that it's the role of the different communities throughout the Western Hemisphere has to be one of solidarity, and that's not what the United States has always exhibited
Right.
in its relationships with the other communities. We took over a part of Mexico and called it the United States, and then accused them of being aliens in the country. It's rather strange. And the same thing in the case of Puerto Rico, where, like some of the talks we've had at LASC in the past will concern Vieques, where in fact the United States was bombing Puerto Rico against the will of the Puerto Rican population, and also the history of how the United States had messed up the educational system in Puerto Rico, just totally warped it by, similar to what happened in Canada, maybe, where they said, well, we'll just stop letting you do your own thing and make you do our thing, as I understand it, and not even teach you how to carry on, not allow the schools to talk about the tradition. This was something that happened, if you go far back, as I understand, under the United States
Just
domination.
terrible. Domination, exactly. That is the word.
Yeah, so the U.S. should practice solidarity, not domination, in my opinion.
Right.
That's sort of what LASC stands for.
I can't ever miss an opportunity to talk about or to mention Bill Jungle's hat, red hat, and it says, wait a minute, make you the United States Mexico.
Peter, I'm sorry, you were gonna go ahead.
No, I just saying, to Terrence's point, when you talk about the occupation of Puerto Rico, there was a particular point in time to where children weren't even allowed to speak their native language in the classroom, right? You had to speak English. The U.S. Needs to not only, the U.S. needs to practice what they preach when it comes to democracy and allowing people the right to choose, because that hasn't been kind of the tone that the U.S. has taken with territories that is occupied, and it's unfortunate.
Right, at all. They haven't taken that tone ever at all with all the indigenous people. It's the same with
Absolutely.
In every geographic area.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at our indigenous brothers and sisters, and the harm that was brought upon them. There's never been any type of forgiveness of that. You look at our brothers in the Black community. There's never been anything to really address that. History wants to whitewash that. You look at the relationship between the Caribbean communities and the relationship between the U.S., not only just the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, but you look at Cuba, you look at, Nicaragua, Peru, and then the relationship that the U.S. has had with those countries. And they've all been problematic, and they've all been, to take resources or to strengthen some national, point of interest that the United States has wanted. And it's a shame. It's truly a shame.
I think for me as a Puerto Rican sitting in political science classes and being educated by men who, as patriots, taught me history in a version where our country won, and then to learn as an individual what those history lessons had personally impacted not only on my culture, but on my people, and even more my sense of self, right? Like as a person that has like a Taino heritage, and as a woman, like, I just think that, the term kind of cultural genocide comes to term, where it's just my grandmother marched with Martin Luther King. And as a political scientist, like, I wasn't educated about their collective action, their solidarity with other unions. I wasn't educated about Dolores Huerta. And when I met her, I told her that in LA, I was like, I had no idea about you being Puerto Rican, growing up in New York, going to schools that were good schools where I received a rigorous education, right, for contemporary standards, but just not having that lens of like my own personal identity, my own personal history, I think has really impacted me as an educational leader and really makes me want to tell different stories. Actually, that's why I have my column, Vicki. I have an entire column based on this concept. But go ahead.
So good.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to Talia's point, me being a father of 6 beautiful children, my wife and I have a blended family, and we've always found it important to educate our kids about the past, the cultural past that's not taught in school. Like Talia said, she talked about the Taino Indians, and I have actually here in my office, I have a sign that my daughter made when she was, I think she was still in grammar school, and on that sign it says, "Thank you, Bob, for the story about our heritage and our culture." Right, and it depicts the African slave and the Taino Indian and the Spaniard, and talking about that culture at a young age and get them to understand where they come from, what they believe in, and it's powerful, and it's something that's just not taught, and it's unfortunate. So,
well, it needs to be taught, and that's one of the things. Now, I think we have a long way to go, and I do want to talk some more about organizing. But while we're on the education piece, it's so important that. That the people's history is told. The people's history. I love, Howard Zinn, what a hero he was. The people's history of the United States. And I also love, we've been using her story too, because it's not just his story and her story also. But the real story of what really happened, not whitewashing it, leaving out parts, none of that, and so it's so critical to getting any progress, because until we address the past, we're not going to be able to go forward. And that is why we've been as stuck as we have. And I want to say in Germany, when, with the Holocaust, it's actually Holocaust Remembrance Day today, I think. And they're being recognized
Thank you for looking that up.
Is it today? And it's going to be recognized locally on Sunday, I think. But the main thing to me, the Germans did a lot of horrible, terrible things, right? Horrible, terrible things. But they told about it. They taught the children in school, yes, this is what happened here. Never again, right? Will we let it happen here? So that is where they took the great leap forward that we've never even begun to take. And we just had, he who shall not be named, saying that it is a federal offense to teach the real history. That federal funding would be taken away from programs. I think was, if they were telling the real history of the racism, the sexism, the genocide that was going on in this country.
Go ahead, Terrence. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was thinking about that is, it does seem that, the U.S. hates to hear bad news about our history. Mm-hmm. And, it is always sad to hear that someone who you thought was a hero like Teddy Roosevelt or Thomas Jefferson.
So devastated about TR. Like, you have no idea.
Well, I never liked Teddy Roosevelt that much, but I did like Thomas Jefferson. So, it's a learning experience. But so history, what it seems is that if the history concentrates more on how people worked so hard at all of these stages to overcome the problems of government, to correct government when it was wrong. It doesn't have to be a history like the former Mr. X, who we don't want to talk about. Right. Mr. X would say, well, if you talk about the bad things we did, you're dragging America down. But instead, we should be talking about all the people that corrected the problems that were in the government, like your grandmother, was it? To glorify the people's history, which is the people that corrected the mistakes. And what we learn in this solidarity type stuff of across the communities in the Western Hemisphere is that, in spite of having, every country has a bad history of some sort, but every community has figured out ways to take care of to address these problems. And for the United States not to want to address the problem is that's the tragedy. You should recognize the problem and simultaneously praise the people that are trying to make progress on these problems. And then young people wouldn't feel bad. Like you said, his children, as long as they learn about the people that worked so hard, they're happy for the future.
Well, the other thing I think I'd say is that, Epictetus said everything has two handles, one by which it can be held and one by which it cannot be held. Mm-hmm. So, we all are flawed, individuals, and, just calling things what they are, looking at the positives and the negatives, being, truthful, truth and love, truth and love. So often I feel like that's what Dr. King talked about, the unarmed truth and unconditional love. When you talk about the truth and examine it from all sides, there's not only one piece of it, there's a whole parts of it. So looking at it in its totality gets us where we need to go. So it's not about hating, it's just about learning and really looking at all the aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some great points that Vicki, you brought up, and Terrence and Talia. That Germany got it right? They admitted their faults, understood it, educated against it to ensure that it never happened again. The reason why it hasn't happened in the United States is because it's still happening. just in different forms, right? The oppression, the racism that we saw back, in the South, the Jim Crow. I mean, we have Confederate flags that were flying in our state capitol. What is that? That tells you everything we need to know about the United States and where it currently is when it's dealing with relations towards the Black and brown communities. And it will not change until we can get rid of, these systematic structures that are being put in place to oppress people of color, period. I mean, we're seeing right now in 27 states, they're putting together voting restriction packages that are going to keep Black and brown people from the polls for the simple fact that we had over 80 million people come out to vote, right? So that's their response. It's not to address the issues of the Black and brown community to grow their electorate. It's to steal elections. It's to minimize the voice of people of color. So until the United States, addresses its racist past, addresses its racist present, and begins to work to address those issues, we're never going to have a true reckoning of the past. And when it comes to education, until we can take the money out of education and stop companies from profiting on education, we'll never get to a point to where we're teaching the true history, right? The history of the people, the history of this country. And what a great story it would be if we can actually print about how the United States dealt with its ugly past and moved to a brilliant future. Right. But unfortunately, until we get the leadership, in all forms and all levels of government in place, that's never going to happen. I'll stop there before I go on another.
Do you see why I invited him, Vicki? I was like, Peter would be good. We should invite Peter.
No, you're absolutely so right. No, and you are so right in everything that you just said. And that is so much of what we need to do. And I think, in our different ways, we're trying to get there, and I do feel encouraged. I do feel, so, I mean, not that there isn't still racism. I mean, first of all, racism, going to that. Racism is in the air we breathe. Let's not say that problem over there, those people over there. We are all affected by the stereotypes, the history, and the actuality that is the legacy of all the things that happened that we haven't dealt with. So that's just a reality. So we can't just say it's not happening. It is happening. But when we can say it's happening and we want to learn and we need to change and we need to address and call things what they are, right? And what makes me feel so hopeful is that we've had some dramatic changes. And this one Swami Bhyanananda, he said, it's the upwising. People are wising up.
It's so true. I was in Pennsylvania working on a presidential campaign, and I saw a sign from an organization called Pittsburgh United that really caught me. And the sign simply said that we are leaders of our own democracy. Right. And like that, it literally stopped me in the street. We were doing a march and it stopped me in the street. And I just stared at this thing for like 5 minutes because it's so true. We have all the answers that we need. Right. We have the power to truly bring about change. It's just us. It's the willingness. We have to have the willingness to want to put ourselves out there to demand change. And if we don't get it, then we have to have the willingness to move on from whoever it is that we perceive has the power to give it to us. So it's in our hands, and yes, there is hope. You see these uprisings, these upwisings, as you say. You see people in the streets. You see new activists, new blood, new life brought into this fight, and it is hopeful. It is hopeful that we can really sustain this movement and bring about substantial change to all communities, right? In particular, the communities that have been historically oppressed, and that's the Latino, the Latinx community, I should say, and the Black community, right? So. There's opportunity, there's hope, but we still do have ways to go in this country.
I was just going to add, as excited as I am when I see things like marijuana reform and different things that I know directly affected, the lives of the people around me, I am concerned when, as an American and as a political scientist, there's a disconnect between people's understanding of history and their understanding of what efficiency looks like. So the idea that we've even ever had an immigration system here in the United States that has ever truly worked, right, in my opinion as a political scientist, is a fiction. And I am so troubled as a mother by what I see in the way that our children are being held as a Latino community. And, you know, that's one of the reasons, Vicki, I didn't want the show just to be about Puerto Rico, because so much is happening in Puerto Rico and in our relationship between the island and Puerto Rico, but we're always unified by that idea that we're citizens and that we're patriots, and we both really love the United States. But I'm really worried, and you know, I want to lift up your work, Terry, and just kind of hear what your perspective is on that, because I know that there's been a lot of advocacy on your part for years for our neighbors.
Yeah, you know, because there is going to be a lot of talk over the next periods of, you know, what happens if the United States is going to be accused of being too nice to its neighbors, and therefore they're all going to come, they're all going to move across a border which should, in a way, never exist. So the nice thing about the situation between the United States and Puerto Rico is, in a sense, there's no border. There's no border there. And, you know, ultimately, the human race says there should be no borders. Countries disagree, but, you know, somehow the countries have to work out how they can feel that they're still a country and yet, to the greatest extent possible, have no borders. And certainly in times of when people are in trouble, they have to open the doors for people that are in trouble, always. How could we be America? You know, it is remarkable over the last 4 years how the word democracy was thrown out of the American dream. You know, that one part of the political system said, democracy, we don't really want democracy.
You're still saying
We
it.
don't want the Statue of Liberty. We don't want the huddled masses. We don't want to give people freedom. How could they say this?
Well, I think they can go back to wherever they were living before.
Yeah, I hope that they'll stop talking. They'll just be a little quieter now. So, you know, living up to the goals is one thing, but to throw the goals out with the dishwater is really staggering in America. So I hope that there will be a big pendulum swing where people will say, well, of course we stand for freedom and we stand for accepting people in trouble when they need asylum. We should give them asylum. If someone shows up on your doorstep and says they need help, you should give them help. I mean, that's the job of humanity. So, you know, as to how to get the country there, I don't know, but at least we have to, you know, we learn about it from other countries by learning about the Latin America Solidarity Committee, the part that I work with is mainly about, if we know more about Mexico, we won't be so afraid of Mexico. If we know, you know, that's not to say Mexico has problems. They have, the United States has problems. Every country in Latin America has its own problems. Some of them officially try to fix their problems. You know, they really talk about, you know, the statement, you know, of Cuba to build a medical system that can go all over the world and help people when they suddenly need help. You know, instead of having an army, they have a medical school, a massive medical school, bigger. I hope it's bigger than our Pentagon. So that's, you know, that's an interesting, we should be, you know, the United States should be learning from how other countries face these common problems to all of humanity, you know. That's sort of what the solidarity means for us. Although last night in this presentation on Nicaragua, the speaker, who's the ambassador to the UN, was a labor organizer in the United States, but Nicaragua, a new government in Nicaragua called on him to return and to take on this ambassadorship. But he said that the unions that he had worked so hard with we're very much about solidarity of workers all over the world, and therefore the solidarity of all peoples all over the world, and the fact that the unions should always and do promote education of their own members of what their members are facing, what their common workers are facing other places in the world, because then they have a clearer sense of which political levers they should be trying to control in the United States. We want to be shifting policy to the direction that really promotes solidarity. That's what I learned from the talk yesterday.
So yeah, I mean, to your point, Terrence, right? Like that's the one beauty about labor is that it is the force that goes past gender. It goes past your racial background. It bonds people together on a common cause, and this is what we need more of in this country. We need people to see past simple things as one's color, one's race, one's social or economic standing in this world, and we need people to see past their individual silos. And this is what labor unions do, right? It galvanizes people towards a common cause, whether that cause is a social justice issue, whether that cause is a contractual issue in an employer. It has been proven time and time again that the labor movement can be a force to galvanize those who choose to unify under the banner of solidarity.
I love the holding up of solidarity as the thing, because actually Cornel West said what we need two things, and that will really fix everything. If we have moral integrity and universal solidarity. So that universal solidarity, so that's where if we really operate with those two things as well as we can in our human imperfections and striving to that like moral integrity, perfect moral integrity, makes me think of, may my thoughts and my words mean one, may my words and my actions be one. So that's out of the Hindu scriptures. So that's a very tall order. So I'm not saying that we can all do that so perfectly, but that our efforts towards real integrity and as a country, that we should have integrity as a country and as a government that has been the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. When we can start, so a good start, Biden said, let us help these countries so that instead of that we're economically oppressing them so much, but let us help them so that we're not doing that, so that people can stay home if they want to, right? So all of those sorts of things that need to be happening.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm so excited for our future. I think that there's been a lot of investment in convincing Americans that we're different, or that there are more differences than there are commonalities, and that in fact, as Americans, there's more commonalities than there are differences, and we all love the Buffalo Bills, I'm just joking, but that we all want the same things for ourselves and for our families, and that, we're stronger if we work together. And I think I always call for rigorous improvement of my government. I'm a political scientist. I'm an analyst. That's what I spent time learning. And I just would hope that all my neighbors and my countrymen would want that same rigorous improvement. And it's just agreeing on the methodologies to get to that place of improvement that I think sometimes takes the consensus building. But I'm really excited for the future and for the space that we hold, when we have powerful conversations like these. I also want to give a shout to the Teamsters, because they were the only folks that sent us any mail at home. And also to my union, UUP, because I need to.
Well, I can't help but saying one thing though. So yes, citizens, and it's not like, I'm not, happy to be an American, I guess, here in the belly of the beast. But I want to say it has to be worldwide too, because really we are one world facing, when we talk about climate catastrophe, what to speak of the nuclear issues and everything else, all of our issues, we face them as a whole world. So I remember when I was doing social work, working for an agency, and they had different groups that were all working with different kids, right? So they thought, well, we want to improve teamwork. So we'll split you all into different groups and have you compete against each other. And I thought at the time, what is wrong with this picture? This is not about cooperation. This is about competition, right? So and then I learned, and since I do peaceful conflict resolution, there are exercises where you as a whole group are working as a group on your shared challenges to work and function together to make that happen. And that's what we need to be doing as a world. And I feel like the international organizations can be, back to when they're infused with that real integrity and solidarity, they will help us get there.
Well, without a doubt, I think you're absolutely right, Vicki. Right? It's just, there's particular issues that have to be thought out on a global scale. When we talk about climate change, or global warming, right? So like that's an issue that we're facing now. That's something that needs to be addressed now. We need to have a universal language when it comes to climate change. We need to have a universal action when it comes to climate change. It can't be, a quarter of the world is pulling their weight when it comes to rectifying the climate situation, and, another quarter of the world is doing whatever they want to do, and so on and so forth, right? That we have to be in lockstep because it is the existential threat of our time. You know what I mean? We only have one planet. There's no going to Mars. I don't care how many times, Elon Musk might try or Mr.
Just better be in your workplace. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. So I mean, we have issues that are serious that need to be addressed right now, and we need to do it on a global scale.
And the other thing, which actually I think you brought up, Terry, is about movement of peoples. Now, money is able to move all over the place, so why can't people? Where we have all these, the kids in Afghanistan that we are connected to, they have these, they call it the Border Free Center where they meet. Because they feel like all the borders and all of that's hurting us, So I don't say don't have anything, but that porousness is a healthy thing. Let people come and go.
Yeah, I wondered, thinking about climate change, I guess I'll ask Talia. See, I'm an educator, but unfortunately I educate, in mathematics, where we don't get to talk about, in a sense, we don't talk about human issues. We talk about thinking issues, but not human issues. But I do teach a climate course, mathematics of climate. And what I noticed over, let's say, the last few years is that perhaps the young people of the world listen across borders more than the old people of the world. And that, and maybe that's going to be especially true of the generations that are coming right now. And they're, the big numbers of young people are not necessarily, well, they're certainly not in the upper class communities, the rich communities. They're in the developing communities. And if these, if they experience solidarity more strongly, then they don't have this resistance to solidarity that old selfish people have. I'm hoping. I just wonder if you see that in young people when you're educating them now. Are they different? Do you see every year is different, but what do you think?
Absolutely. I work with a group called Adelante Estudiante Latino. We are the Latino identity-based group on Buffalo State campus, and I have so many student leaders that really just speak to the intersectionality of their identities, and really see them as a fluid thing, as not even something that need to be defined, and that, even by asking for definition, we're really kind of restricting that evolution. I have a very place-based identity, and I think that comes when you live in Buffalo or when you're a Buffalo girl. But my dad's also from Manhattan, where he has a very place-based identity, and I've kind of found myself re-explaining that often. Why are things different for me with my perspective? But I think that's a really beautiful opening to say I've seen solidarity not only from the young people in Puerto Rico who have been moving forward our conversation about improvement in our relationship, but in the young people who are my neighbors. And, there are my neighbors who are fighting for freedom and with their family members in some of their home countries. And it's so easy, and Vicki and I have been talking about this for weeks now, it's so easy to explain to me why what's happening in Myanmar or Burma is important to me because it's important to my neighbors. And why I want for them the same kind of freedom that I feel. But I think that that's not always been something that people really understand. But you and Vicki both have had a front row seat in, unifying people and having those conversations. So I think this is why just generationally it's so good, because it's a lot of the same challenge, I think.
What do you think, Peter?
Listen, I love it. I love the conversation. I second everything that Terrence and Talia talked about, right? Like it's interesting to watch this younger generation kind of, move in between the different, silos that people want to put them in. This generation is, as like Talia put it, is very fluid. They will not be confined. And I think that's a good thing.
It makes me think of when I just went to Minnesota, the people who were chaining themselves to the machines to slow down the Enbridge, the young people. Yep. And, being arrested, everything else, just to slow them down. And it also makes me think, so I feel like we are also connected. So, and also I feel like all of our issues are connected. So we're really attracted to, like, with the Women's March, we've made it, it's not about the women, it's about everyone's rights. The right, so all the things that unite the struggles were really attractive. The Pure People's Campaign, so many things. But so I want to mention also there's legislation. The legislation is starting to go that route, with the beginning with the Green New Deal. Well, now in New York State, there's something called there was one bill that already went through that was about addressing environmental, racial, and economic justice, trying to, improve the justice in all those three areas and connecting it. And the newest part of that is the CCIA, the Climate and Community Investment Act, which is about getting companies to pay for the pollution that they do instead of leaving it for the taxpayer, and that funding can be used for the working against the environmental racism, against the environmental issues that we have to invest in to change, for renewables, for improved economic justice for the people and the communities that have paid the price with all the pollution and all the industrialization, et cetera. So, and Thrive is another piece of that. That's the federal version of that. So that's coming up too. So I wonder if that's something that you think that that you all might be interested in at the Western Area Labor Federation.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not too familiar with those pieces of the legislation, but in the past we have worked towards climate justice. We worked very closely with Clean Air Coalition around the Huntley Plan and getting that landmark legislation in New York State passed that had to deal with the coal burning plants in Tonawanda. So we understand the value of dealing with climate change and making sure that the bad actors are being held accountable, so that communities that these facilities are located in are not being devastated and not being made to foot the bill. And we would definitely be, keeping an eye on these particular piece of legislation that you named to see where, for lack of a better term, for us to get in where we fit in. because, you know, we're an organization that believes in consensus. We believe that we don't always necessarily have to take the lead, that sometimes we're there, just there to support and lend our way to movements, because the work is being done in the community, right? There are organizations here in Western New York, across the state and across the country that are handling this issue. And sometimes, you know, when it comes to, organizations, you tend to see them jump in and kind of take over the process. Well, we're not one of those. We're one that are willing to support and stay in our lane, as they say, for lack of a better term. But I'm grateful that you actually brought those up, because I definitely do want to educate myself more on those issues.
Well, I think you'll be interested in those. And the other thing I can't help mentioning, though, because it isn't included in that, where I would like to put in I feel like there's a way of doing things. So if we did things with the integrity and the solidarity, if we did things in truth and love, you know, that if we communicating and cooperating, right? If we really do that, we're going to be moving forward, you know, because I feel like another way is possible, but that way also has to include nonviolence, and it has to include not being the biggest purveyor of violence on the planet, right? It has to not include, you know, wars of aggression or being the biggest. I mean, I know that we have a mammoth arms manufacturing thing, and it is so deadly and it is so unhelpful. So if we would only stop doing that and start making more, I don't know, toys, cooking utensils, whatever you want, you know, anything, you know. So the whole arms manufacturing. Now, I'm not saying down to nothing, but I mean, it's also, as Dr. King said, the bombs over there exploding over here. All of our resources go into these military aggression, and so many resources that go into the military and arms production. Right. And those things, you know, if we want to survive, if we want our children, the seventh generation, you know, that's another area we need to do some work.
If I can just on that, you know, the military industrial complex, you know, if we put a fraction of the funding that we put into the military into educating our youth, I think, you know, we'd be in a lot better place right now. We wouldn't have the amount of issues, you know, so that's where I'm going to leave that. You know, we really need to reevaluate, you know, our values and where we put our financing in, because our youth are getting left behind, and it's causing so many systematic problems. So, you know, I would love to see them really reevaluate, you know, the value that they put on education and you know, and defense. If you look at the budget, the defense budget is just through the roof. It's astronomical when you look at the numbers.
Yeah,
it's crazy. And then you look at the number for education, and it's just like, what are we doing here? You can see where our priorities are. You know?
Right. What did they say when they say, you know, we want to have you know, all the programs we need in the schools and for the health and education and welfare for people, you know, and education especially, and then let the military have a bake sale.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you know, the defense of our country is important, but, you know, equally important or more so important is the education of the people that live in this country. You know, it's a shame. So when we, you know, anytime that this country, a city, and any one of the states in this country face any type of economic turmoil, the first thing that they cut is healthcare and education, two things that the people in those states need the most, right? And what does that tell you about, you know, the value that we place on, you know, educating people so that they can better themselves in this life, or you know, the making sure that the people who live in these states, you know, have the health needed to be prosperous, right? To obtain that, you know, American dream, you know, so it's a lot of times action tells you everything. And every time that there's trouble when it comes to a budget, the first thing that they want to cut again is healthcare and education.
Well, and this is where it's about a way of doing things. So back to also with the policing. So all the other community programs that had less. So we would, you know, Fear Inc. gets the money. That's what I call it, Fear Inc. So it's efforts to intimidate, control, et cetera. And again, we're not saying, you know, are we saying there should be no defense, no no policing. No, you don't have to. That's not our question, right? Our question is from where we are, where do we need to go? And we want to be the community we want to be and need to be as a community, and also as a country and as a world.
I think also we want to be really wise about the way we spend our money, and the administrative law system really needs to be updated, reformed, and people need some education around, because when it was time for us to spend FEMA money to feed people in Puerto Rico, we weren't able to get those monies to the people who were on ground level actually feeding people. And we were going through an archaic system of putting, administrative RFPs out there so that we could feed people and getting substandard food that is not appropriate nor worth my American tax dollar. So I think for me as a political scientist, when we think about the billions of dollars that our government has spent or will spend or hopes to spend, for better or worse, and in whatever different area or arena, I think it's really important that we look at administrative law, and then we look at how are we building opportunities. And Kellyanne and her work talks a lot about this in the Economic Justice Task Force. How are we building opportunities like we are with marijuana reform for communities of color to access those systems of spending, right? And how are they being educated and empowered to engage with the administrative law spending complex that, is just very present and really permeates every part of American policy, including food, where I put a lot of my thought. So I know that we have a lot of improving to do, but I think really holding spaces like these, and Vicki, that's why I've always been so grateful to you, holding spaces like these and civic conversations like the one you've been supporting, Terry, are so important, because this is where the ideas are fleshed out and the tough conversations are had, and the long pauses where I stare at Peter, he knows exactly what I'm thinking, but I'm not going to think, because it's important that we represent our community and, be present to just, for better or worse, hash it out. So I'm so grateful for this space and for everyone. And I hope, Peter, you'd think about coming back and talking with us, Vicki, if we can find the opportunity to have you back, and Terry also.
Oh, absolutely. I have so many more things. I want to hear what you think about or see what we can do working together. So it's very excited to have you on the show. Very excited to have all of you together here. And so what are some final thoughts? I think we're really coming along. So just your sort of bottom line, like what do you want people to remember out of what we need to do, maybe? Anybody? Here, go.
I'll say one thing. I'm very grateful that I get from the union a lot of email, which is, and now it's going to be coming from your office, because it used to be signed by Richard Lipsitz. So, yeah. And I'm very grateful for that. And I think everybody in Western New York should be on that mailing list, because first of all, it says always, brothers and sisters,
Right.
solidarity. And then it says, you should know what your brothers and sisters are going through. And it gives a little analysis, but it just says you should know about things that other people are doing to try to fix things. So I think that's really good. And expand your mailing list.
Love it. We love definitely getting information out. So, but just kind of like last thoughts for me, I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm really appreciative of the space. I echo what Talia said. I think spaces like this are important for us to continue to have conversation, dialogue. We might not always agree on issues or directions that might be taken, but I think it's equally important that we provide the opportunity to listen to each other. And I think that's what we need more of on a number of issues in this country, in this community. We need to, number one, educate ourselves more. Social media is not the end-all be-all, right? Just because you see it on Facebook doesn't necessarily mean it's true. But we need to be open-minded to other ideas, because there is more than one way to skin a cat, as they say. So, there's opportunity there. We need to continue to push forward, to be, intentional and unapologetic as we pursue what we view to be true, what we view to be right in our communities, of color. And, however that looks, I'm all for it. And, I'm here to, as a personal goal, I'm here to really make sure that the youth have a place at the table. And my term as Western New York Area Labor Federation, one of the primary focuses that I will be focusing on is creating spaces for people to lead, for them to sharpen their skills. Because as Richard Lipsitz has done for me, he's been a mentor for me for a long time. And for him to step aside and create a space for me now to lead and to grow, it's equally important that I do that for others as well. And, being the first minority president of the Area Labor Federation in the state and maybe even in the country, it's important for me personally to create those spaces for people to grow. So I thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to future discussions. This is great. You guys kept me up way past my bedtime, but this is fantastic.
I'm sorry about that. It's usually not quite this way. And any last word, Talia?
Sure. I would just say that we're more alike than we are different. And I'm so proud of my neighbors who just support conversations. And if you agree with us or you don't agree with us, please go to the West New York Peace Center, because we are here for all conversations, for all people of the planet. And thank you to both of our guests and Vicki.
And thank you all so much. So we've been talking peace, and together we are talking peace in truth and love. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. Good night. I know it's late. Thank you. There'll be more to follow.